The first thing Nate Calloway ever said to me was, "Your anchor geometry is wrong." Not hello, not good morning, not any version of an introduction that acknowledged we had never met before, and were currently standing on a wet ledge 40 meters above the Cumberland River gorge in the dark. Just that quiet, certain, from somewhere to my left, and I turned and looked at him, and then looked at my anchor, and felt the specific, cold clarity of someone who already knew he was right. I had been building anchors since I was 19. I had been a high-angle rope rescue technician with the Tennessee State Parks Emergency Response Team for 4 years. I had placed anchors in rain and wind and darkness and conditions that made this ledge look hospitable. And the anchor I had just built, the one I was about to trust with the 200-pound extraction load, had a geometry problem. I had missed because I was cold and tired, and had been on this ridge for 6 hours. I looked at it for 3 seconds. Then I pulled the piece and rebuilt it. "Better," he said. I turned around. He was already moving toward the edge, med bag on his back, looking down into the gorge with the focused calm of someone who had been in high places and bad conditions long enough to stop finding them remarkable. "Who are you?" I said. "Nate Calloway," he said. "Wilderness medic. Contract with search and rescue. Your team lead called me in when the weather report changed." He looked at me, headlamp to headlamp, 40 meters above a flooded river, rain starting to come in sideways. "The patient?" 60 meters down, I said. "Left side of the secondary face. Ledge system, partial shelter. Injuries? Suspected ankle fracture. Possible hypothermia onset." "He's been down there for hours." He looked at the face, looked at my rebuilt anchor, looked at me. "How long is the extraction going to take?" 40 minutes in these conditions, I said. "If nothing changes, everything's going to change," he said. "The storm cell is moving faster than the forecast. We have 30 minutes before this face becomes unworkable." He picked up the haul line. "So, move." And that was the beginning of the fastest, most precise, most completely reliable 43 minutes of technical rescue work I had ever been part of. The Cumberland Plateau runs east of Nashville like the city's wilder, older twin, the same Tennessee sky above it, but the ground dropping away in gorges and bluffs and creek drainages that turned flash floods from inconveniences into emergencies fast enough to catch experienced people off guard. The hiker who had gone over the secondary face, his name was Patrick, 22, from Murfreesboro, out on a solo day hike that had turned into a night emergency when the rain came in and the trail above the gorge became a waterway. Had done most things right. He'd activated his emergency beacon. He'd found a ledge. He'd stayed put. The one thing he hadn't done right was go out with a partner, which was the thing that mattered now, because a 22-year-old on a narrow ledge 60 meters down in a rising flood event with a probable ankle fracture needed 2 people to extract. And one of those people needed to be a medic who could manage him through the vertical without the injury becoming a crisis. Nate had rigged with me before I'd asked him to. He'd been setting up the lowering system when I registered peripherally. That there was a second pair of hands in the system, methodical, knowing exactly where they were going, not in my way. I looked up. Nate was threading the brake device with the practiced ease of someone who had done this enough times that the equipment was just an extension of what he intended. "You rig?" I said. "I've run vertical extractions before," he said. "I won't take the technical lead. That's yours. But I can be useful up here while you go down." "You're not going down with me?" He met my eyes. "You need someone on the haul system who can read the rope and read the patient at the same time. That's me up here, better than down there. Beat. Unless you have someone else?" I looked around the ledge. My team lead was 100 meters back managing the trail access. The 2 other team members were handling the approach rope on the lower section. There was nobody else. "You know how to manage a haul system in a storm?" I said. "I know how to manage a haul system in worse than this," he said. "Set your descender. Let's go." Going over the edge of a cliff face in the dark in a worsening storm is not something that becomes routine. You can do it 100 times, and the moment the rock disappears under your feet and the rope takes your weight will always be a moment that requires your full attention. I had done it 67 times. I gave it my full attention. Nate's voice came through my earpiece the second I weighted the rope. Rope is running clean. Brake is set. You have 60 meters of line. Copy, I said. Storm cell is tracking faster than the updated forecast. I'd estimate 22 minutes before the wind makes the face unworkable. You'll know before I tell you. I'll know, I agreed. I descended. The face was wet. Limestone, the Cumberland Plateau's characteristic geology. The kind that had good features when it was dry, and turned into a frictionless argument when it was wet. I moved carefully, reading the rock by feel and headlamp, managing my swing in the wind that was already picking up from the southwest. Nate kept talking. Not constantly. Not filling space. Not performing reassurance. He talked when there was something to say and stopped when there wasn't, which meant that when his voice came through the earpiece I listened without filtering. Wind shift incoming, 10 seconds. Expect a left swing. 10 seconds later, the wind shifted. I swung left and managed it. You're at the ledge system in 8 meters. Patrick is visual from here. He's upright, which is good. He's been moving his arms, which means the hypothermia hasn't progressed to the shivering stop stage. Can you see his left foot? Not clearly, but he's keeping weight off it, which confirms the ankle. Pause. He's seen your headlamp. He's tracking you. I dropped the last 8 meters and my feet found the ledge. Patrick was 22 years old and had been alone on a narrow limestone shelf for 4 hours and 16 minutes in a rising storm, and he looked at me with the specific expression of someone who had been maintaining composure by choice and had now been given permission to stop. He didn't cry. He said, "I've never been so glad to see someone. You did everything right," I said. "I'm Owen. I'm going to get you home." The ankle was fractured. I could confirm that much without imaging. The swelling and deformity clear enough in headlamp light, and the hypothermia assessment was mild to moderate. Core temperature probably in the 35-degree range based on the presentation. Shivering present but controlled. Cognition intact. Coordination degraded. Manageable. Workable. I had done this assessment in under 90 seconds. I reported it up the line. Copy, Nate said. Mild moderate hypothermia, closed ankle fracture. I'm prepping the litter rigging. What's your packaging plan? Vacuum splint the ankle. Thermal wrap. Litter extraction in vertical orientation. I'll need the litter down here. Already on its way. A beat. 18 minutes. The litter arrived 60 seconds later. Lowered, clean, and controlled. I packaged Patrick with the efficient speed that the timeline demanded. Splint, wrap, harness, litter. Talking to him the whole time. Keeping him present and warm, and as comfortable as a person could be in a litter on a limestone ledge in a storm. Owen, Nate said. In my earpiece. Yeah. The anchor, the rebuilt one. The load distribution on the hull is running clean. You built it right the second time. It was not the moment for that observation. We were 15 minutes from an unworkable face, and I was loading a patient into a litter. And yet, the observation landed precise, specific. The acknowledgement of a correction made and made correctly, and something in it settled a thing that I hadn't known was unsettled. Thanks, I said. 15 minutes, he said. You ready to come up? Ready, I said. The hull was clean. Nate managed the system with the same unhurried precision he'd brought to everything. Steady pulls, correct pace, calling the rope status every 10 meters without being asked. Patrick came up stable. I came up after him when I cleared the edge and my feet found solid ground. Nate was already at the litter, running a reassessment. Hands on Patrick, checking what 4 minutes of vertical movement had done to his vitals and his ankle and his temperature. Updating the report. He'd call into the hospital on the way down. He looked up at me once, quick, complete, and said, "Good work down there." The storm broke over the ridge 30 seconds later. The post-rescue debrief happened at the Ridge Station 7 equipment bay, 2 hours after Patrick was loaded into the ambulance. Rain on the metal roof. The particular sound of a storm that had become someone else's problem. My team lead had gone to file the incident report. The other team members had gone to the truck. Nate and I were the last two at the equipment table. breaking down gear with the systematic post-operation discipline of people who understood that the next emergency started the moment this one ended. He was restocking his medbag. I was coiling rope. The anchor, I said. The geometry problem. Left handpiece was cammed to shallow. Under static load, it would have held. Under a dynamic hull load with the swing component in wind conditions, he shook his head. Probably would have held. But probably isn't good enough at 40 meters. No, I agreed. It isn't. You'd been on the ridge 6 hours. That's not an excuse. It's not, he said. It's a data point. Cold and fatigue degrade fine motor assessment. You should build a check into your pre-operation protocol for extended deployments. I looked at him. You're giving me a protocol suggestion. You gave me a good extraction, he said. It's a fair trade. I coiled another meter of rope. Outside, the storm was settling into its post-event pattern. Steady rain. No drama. The Cumberland Plateau doing its quiet work of draining the excess and returning to itself. Where are you based? I said, Nashville. I have a house in East Nashville near Shelby Park. He closed a compartment on his medbag. You? Same. Well, apartment. Woodland Street. He looked up. I run in Shelby Park in the mornings. I know Shelby Park. Most people in East Nashville do. Something in his expression, not quite a smile, but the space where one was considering arriving. You run? When I'm not on a cliff face, I said. The almost smile arrived. Small, real, the first fully unguarded thing I'd seen from him in 4 hours of high-stakes technical operation. It looked exactly like what I'd expected. Unhurried, warm underneath the precision, Tennessee in its bones. There's a place on Gallatin Avenue, he said. Opens at 6. The owner makes biscuits from scratch until they run out. Which on a morning after a storm, usually around 7:30. Because people come in after weather events needing something real. He said it with the same directness he brought to everything. I go on my off days. Is tomorrow an off day? I said. He looked at me. The full attention. It is now, he said. The place on Gallatin Avenue was called The Comeback, and named the owner. A woman named Patrice, who had opened it after losing her previous restaurant to a flood, had chosen deliberately and without irony. She made biscuits with white lily flour and served them with sorghum butter, and had been doing so since 2019, and considered herself the reason that East Nashville had gotten through several subsequent difficult weather events with its morale intact. She looked at the two of us coming in at 6:15 a.m. storm rested, still carrying the specific low-grade alertness of people who had been in the field the previous night, and said, without preamble, Rescue boys. Biscuits are on me. Nate accepted this with the same calm. He accepted everything. I accepted it with the gratitude it deserved. We sat at the window. The storm had left East Nashville clean, washed sidewalks. The locust trees along Gallatin, dropping the last of their water. The morning light coming in low and gold, the way Tennessee morning light did in November. Warm and specific and unhurried. Patrick's ankle, Nate said. He'll need surgery, but he'll keep the function. You checked? I called the hospital this morning. He wrapped his hands around his coffee. I call on all of them. After, I looked at him. All of them? Everyone I bring in. He said it simply. I want to know how the story ends. I thought about the calls I'd made and hadn't made. About the extractions that had ended at the ambulance door. About the gap between the technical completion of a rescue and the actual outcome of it. Which were not the same thing, and which I understood in that moment, been treating as if they were. I haven't always done that, I said. No, not judgment. Just the open attention. I think I was drawing a line. At the handoff, I turned the coffee mug in my hands. Like if I didn't follow up, I couldn't be responsible for whatever came after. Nate was quiet for a moment. The morning light moved across the table. I had a patient 2 years ago, he said. Hypothermia, severe. I got him out, got him to the hospital, filed the report, went home. He looked at his coffee. He didn't make it. I found out 3 weeks later by accident. I'm sorry, I said. I'd already started a different call by then. I'd moved on. He paused. That was the problem. I'd decided the handoff was the end. He looked up. It isn't the end. The people are the point, not the operation. I sat with that for a moment. Outside, a woman was walking a dog along Gallatin in the after-storm light. And the dog was investigating every puddle with the thorough dedication of someone who understood that weather events produced interesting information. You've been doing this how long? I said, 7 years total. 4 as a wilderness medic. He set his coffee down. You? 4 years, rope rescue. 2 years before that, as a fire service EMT. He looked at my hands on the table. I got into high-angle work because I wanted to be useful in the places where other people couldn't go. The hard-to-reach places. Yeah, that's a good reason, he said. Simply, the way he said things that were true. The biscuits arrived. Patrice set them down and said, "Y'all came in last night from the gorge rescue?" And we said yes. And she said, "Then you eat as many as you want." And that was that. This is what I understood in that moment. In the comeback on Gallatin Avenue in the East Nashville morning, some people are competent in the way that gets the job done. And some people are competent in the way that changes how you understand what the job is. Nate Calloway was the second kind, the kind who called the hospital after, who built protocols from near misses, who caught anchor geometry problems before they became events. Being near that kind of competence didn't make you feel small. It made you want to be more precise. The protocol suggestion, I said. The check for extended deployments. Would you write it up? If I brought you the existing protocol document. He looked at me. You're asking me to consult on your team's protocols. I'm asking you to look at what we have and tell me where the geometry is wrong. Something moved across his face. The almost smile again. Fuller this time. The real thing. Arriving and staying. Yeah, he said. I can do that. His hand was on the table, near the biscuit basket. Not reaching, just present. The way he was present everywhere, where, still, at ease, with proximity. My hand moved the small distance across the table. His turned over unhurried, certain, and my fingers settled into his palm, and he closed his hand around mine with the same steadiness he'd used to manage a hall system in a storm. To call wind shifts 10 seconds out, to say your anchor geometry is wrong before he knew my name. Because the anchor mattered more than the introduction. You okay? I said. He looked at me in the Tennessee morning light. The full attention. Warm underneath the precision. Yeah, he said. I keep being. Me too. Outside, Gallatin Avenue was doing what East Nashville did on a Thursday morning after a storm. Conducting its assessment, finding itself mostly intact, getting on with it. The locust trees dripped. Patrice made more biscuits. The morning got warm and gold and unhurried in the specific way of a Tennessee November day that had decided to be generous. 3 months later, the Tennessee State Parks Emergency Response Team updated its pre-operation protocol for extended deployments, Section 4, Subsection C, Anchor System Verification Extended Deployment Fatigue Protocol. 2-person anchor check mandatory for any deployment exceeding 4 hours in adverse conditions. Criteria for adverse: temperature below 45 F, precipitation active, wind above 15 mph. The protocol was co-authored by the team's senior rope tech and a wilderness medic contracted through the State Search and Rescue Network. It was adopted by 2 other regional teams before spring. Nate texted me from a field deployment in the Smokies on the day the second adoption came through. 2 teams. The anchor holds. I was at the equipment bay on a Tuesday morning, pre-rigging for a training exercise, running the extended deployment check on an anchor I had built correctly. The first time, because I'd had 7 hours of sleep and the right protocol, and a wilderness medic who had shown me where the geometry was wrong. Of course it holds, I texted back. It was built right. His reply came in 40 seconds. It was built with better information. And then, biscuit Saturday? Patrice is going to think we live. I typed. We basically do, he replied. She said last week we're her best regulars. She said that? She said, and I quote, "Those rescue boys are good for business. Because people see them come in after a storm and think, if they made it through, the biscuits must be worth it." I laughed out loud in the equipment bay, and the 2 junior techs looked at me and said nothing. which was the Tennessee way of acknowledging something while giving a man his privacy. I put my phone in my pocket, checked the anchor clean geometry, correct load distribution exactly right, clipped in, weighted the rope, and felt it hold the way a well-built thing holds, without drama, without ceremony, with the quiet certainty of something that was made to last.